What's going on, guys? My name is Engineer and I make suboptimal content. In this video, we'll go over a step-by-step walkthrough of how to build a LeetCode clone with React and Node. Now, for those of you that don't know, LeetCode is a platform that's supposed to help you with your coding interview prep, and all it does is it takes in some code and it runs the code on a server, and then it tells you whether your code has passed a couple tests or not. Creating a simple version of LeetCode is actually not too bad, as it turns out. There's really like 6 core steps that we need to get started with, right? The first thing is setting up React with Tailwind CSS, and then displaying the code editor using the CodeMirror library. Finally, sending that code to the backend, which is going to be running on Node.js and Express. And inside of the backend, we're going to want to figure out how to run Python code in a Node.js server, and finally send those results back into the front end so we can display whether or not the user has completed the correct project. That's going to be the whole sort of full stack project that we're going to be going over today. And before we get started, I'm just going to ask for one small favor from you guys, and that is to leave a like for this video and consider subscribing for more suboptimal content just like this. Cool. With that out of the way, let's get started with a demo of the app. We've got the prompt, which is asking the user to create a function to add two numbers. And once we create the code, we're going to be able to submit the code. The backend should be able to process whether or not what we've written is the correct code and then display the actual results. So here I have created a Python function called add, and all it does is add A and B. So once I submit this code, we should see that there are 3 test cases passing. So suppose I incorrectly completed this code. Instead of returning the sum of A and B, I return the sum of A and A. Then we would expect that some of these test cases have failed, and rightfully so. We can see here that when I submit the code, 2 of the test cases failed. Now if I just return, for example, -1, then all 3 of these test cases should have failed because we are not actually solving the problem at hand. And this is the app that I want to build for you guys today, completely from scratch, and do the full front end to back end walkthrough. So let's get started. So the first thing that we want to do is go to an empty directory and create our React and Tailwind project. So Tailwind has a really good installation guide, so I'm just going to follow that right now. So right now it's telling me to do npx create React app and then just specify my project name. I'm going to call this client because we're going to have a client and server with Node.js, so I want to separate those two things. So right now it's creating the React app, and let's just scroll down and start copying these commands because we're going to need to do this to get Tailwind set up. Cool. So the create React app command created the client project, so we can see the into client, and now we can start running these Tailwind commands. So these are just some commands that you're just going to need to follow. All they're really doing is just setting up Tailwind, because Tailwind requires a couple of extra packages, and it requires you to set up your project differently than just, what the default create React app provides with you. So that's all we're doing right here. We're installing Tailwind, we're installing CRACO, we change the package.json. So inside of the package.json, what we can do is, remove our React scripts and do this with Krakow instead. And of course we want to create our Krakow config as well. craco.config.js, and here just sort of copy these things because it just makes it you're just gonna have to copy these things and figure out, set it up in your project. So it just takes a little bit of time to set this up. So create a new file, tailwind.config.js, and paste the information from here, and copy this. You actually don't need to do this if you're not deploying to production, but let's just follow the directions anyway. And the last thing you're going to want to do is import the Tailwind CSS styles into your index.css file. So I'm going to go to the src and then index.css, and here I can import the Tailwind styles. And of course, we want to make sure that index.css is imported into the React project, which I believe it is automatically. So we're good to go. So the best way I like to test whether or not this is working is to just change the text of the project. So we're gonna go to Learn React, and right now Learn React is probably just in white. So I'm just gonna make it red using I think it's text red 500. And so if I save that and run this app using npm run start, what I should see is that the Learn React text is now in red, and that's going to ensure that we have set up Tailwind CSS properly inside of our project. So let's just make sure that everything is up and running. Cool, so as we can see, Learn React is in red, so that means that we set up Tailwind properly. Alright, so the next thing that I like to do is just remove all the unnecessary code. And so I'm just going to do that real quick right over here. So I think auto completions are currently not working because this is a JS file, so I'm going to change that to JSX, and that seems to fix auto completions. I don't know why that is the case, but that is the case. So let me save that, and now we get HTML auto completions. And if I refresh this page, oh, one more thing is I have to change this inside of index.js and make this, instead of /app, change it to ./app.jsx. And then if I rerun the app, I should see our code once again. As that's running, I'm going to remove more code that is unnecessary just because I don't like seeing it inside of my app. So I'm going to remove the report web vitals stuff because that's just annoying. We don't need this SVG thing, so let's just remove that, remove this, remove setup test, just remove a ton of files that are largely unnecessary for this project, just so it's a little bit cleaner and you guys aren't confused with what all the other extra files are doing. So right now, so I'm importing this, so that's causing an error, but if I refresh this, it should work again. Cool. So now that we've cleared out all the unnecessary code, the next step is to display the CodeMirror editor. And getting started with CodeMirror is actually pretty straightforward. All you got to do is install this npm package, which is the UIW/CodeMirror library. So you can go to your React project and stop it from running, and then do an npm install, and then I think it's -save. Yeah. So what this is going to do is install CodeMirror into your project, and the next thing you want to do is display the CodeMirror editor. So let's go to our app.jsx file, and let me just npm run start this so that our code is up and running and we can see it refresh live. And I'm going to go to app.jsx and do these imports. So right now I imported the CodeMirror Sublime text key map, as well as Monokai. Instead of Monokai, let's do Dracula, just because it seems to be the most popular style for a CodeMirror editor. And finally, what we want to do is just display the CodeMirror. So we can replace Learn React with CodeMirror, and let's see where that gets us. Now again, this isn't going to be Monokai, this is going to be Dracula. And so if we save that, we should see something happening. This looks like it's an error. CodeMirror is not defined. CodeMirror in line 11 is not defined. Am I not importing CodeMirror? Oh right, I want to import CodeMirror as well. Oops, I forgot to copy this line. So let's go back up here and then import CodeMirror and see if this is going to fix the issue for us. So refresh the page and there you go. So you got a simple little CodeMirror editor, and inside of it we've currently set the code to be constant a equals 0. So that's exactly what it's displaying right here. And the mode is JSX. First thing we want to do is just change this to Python and kind of style this CodeMirror app just so that it looks a lot cleaner than this, because right now it just looks really weird. So let's see how to do that. So I'm going to create a div, and this is where Tailwind comes in handy just because it's really easy to work with Tailwind. And I'm going to say class name, and I'm going to call this absolute, and we're just going to do a top maybe like a top 20, bottom 40, left 10, right 10, and see what that gets us if we refresh the page. So it looks, pretty okay. Text is centered, and we don't want it centered. So that happens because in one of these classes, the text is centered. So we can just do text left, and that's going to align the text to the left side for us. And now what we want to do is bind the CodeMirror code to a variable inside of our app. We can do that using React hooks. Let's create a use state, and here I'm going to name the variable code and call this set code. And the initial state of this code is just going to be const a equals 0. In fact, let's change this to be Python code, so it's not JavaScript. And I'm just going to say a equals 0, and let's save that. Here it's saying useState is not defined, and that is because we have not imported useState. So let's import useState from React, and right now the code here is we have the same thing basically, except now the value from this code is coming from our hook. And what we want to do is change the code whenever we change inside of CodeMirror. It has this really great option to do that, and that option is called on change. So on change, what we want to do is call a function. And this function takes, the CodeMirror gives us a couple things from this on change method. So it gives us editor. It gives us a couple things. I forget what they are. Let me just check it out right over here. Maybe it shows in the documentation. On change. So we get the instance of the CodeMirror. We get the change. So let's go to down here and call this change. But really, we don't care about the what's being changed here. All we really want is the text of this editor. So, oops, let me change this to Python. And so what we can do is set the code to be the editor dot, I think it's get value. And so whenever we change the code inside of the editor, we should be automatically updating the code inside of our function. Let's just confirm this is happening. So let's console.log the code as soon as we change it, and let's see what happens here. As you can see, as I am changing the code, the new updated code is being displayed. So basically set code is working as expected. So we can just remove that because we know it's working. And now what we want to do is just ask a question, right? Ask the user the question that we want them to solve. So I'm just going to create a simple little div, and here we're just going to say create a function that adds to numbers in Python. So that's going to be the question that we are asking the user. And the last thing we want to do is submit the code that the user writes in here when they are done with it. So let's create a little button at the bottom. And this button, let's just call it submit. And let's add a little bit of styling here. So I'm going to do a border 2, and then let's do background green 500, I think. And when we click it, on click, we can call a function, and this function is supposed to send whatever is inside of code to the backend. Right now we haven't created the backend yet, but we will shortly. So let's just call this function submit code. And let's create this function as well. Const submit code is a anonymous function that is going to, I guess it's going to submit the code to the backend, but right now we can just console.log the code. So cool, we got our submit button over here, and this is our editor. So let's open up the console once again, and let's just say, define a function called add, which takes an a, b, and then returns a plus b. So what we want to do now is when we submit this code, we should see that, when we click this button, we should see that the code is getting console.logged. Cool, so we got the Python code and it's getting logged. So now what we want to do is send this code to the backend and process the Python code. So right now we've got our client-side code mostly completed, and what we want to do is create a Node.js server that's going to take in the Python code and handle it and make sure that the code that we've written is correct. So let's create a new folder inside of our project, and here we're going to call this the client. So we can just say mkdir, we're going to call it the server. And when we cd into the server, we want to do an npm init. And what this is going to do is it's going to initialize Node.js. And we could just skip through all of these real quick. Yeah, that's fine. And when we're here, all we want to do is create an index.js file. And here, let's just create a simple little Express app. So I'm going to save that. Obviously, it's not going to run because we haven't installed Express. So let's install Express. And we can do that with running npm install express. We also want to install cores because, we're going to run into some cores errors because we're going to be talking from the client, which is going to be running on like port 3000. And let's change the port to 80. I think it's called app.use cores like this. And we want to const cores equals require cores like that, I think. And one more thing is we want to use JSON to communicate between the front end and the back end. So I'm going to do use express.json. So all I'm really doing right now is setting up the server so that the front end can communicate with the back end. And what I want to do is create a Python endpoint. This endpoint is going to take the information from the front end. So let's open up the front end from our project. And what we want to do is create a Axios query that's going to hit the back end and send it the required code that we want to execute so that, we can actually see if it's working or not. So on the front end, on the client side, we're going to run an Axios query post, and we pass in the URL. So http://localhost/80 and then Python. And here we want to pass in the actual code. And I think it's .then. Then we're going to get a result, and let's just console.log that result. So right now what we're doing is creating an Axios query on the front end that's going to talk to the back end running on localhost 80. What we want to do from the back end here is accept a post request for Python, console.log the request.body, and then just send a res.json message, and then let's just call it success. So I set up the front end to talk with the back end. Now the last thing I want to do is obviously install Axios on the front end because I haven't done that yet. So let's go to the client, npm install Axios. And so once this is up and running, we should be able to, once we submit our code, get a simple back and forth communication working. So let me open up the client and the server, cd into clone and then server, and then run an npm, I think it's index.js. Wait a minute. Do I have to run, did I not set it up properly? Let me just create it like this, start. And then, oh, sorry, it should be node. That's what I meant to write, index.js. But anyway, we can just do, oops, npm start. This should start up the localhost 80 server. And then if we do npm run start on the client, we should have our project up and running. Got it, whatever. So let me refresh this. And let me open up the console to make sure that we have the full front end to back end. Oh, Axios is not defined. That's because I have not imported Axios into my project. So import Axios from Axios. Cool, so now it should be running. So if I press submit, we should send this code to the backend. The backend should log something in the terminal right over here, and then it should send something to get logged inside of here as well. Cool, so we got our code and we also got our data. So let me just clean this up a little bit. We don't really care about the request, we just care about the data. So let me just do that. And yeah, there we go. We got the message success. So now we got a front end to back end communication. So the final thing to do is to run the Python code that we're sending to the backend and make sure that it is actually working. And to do that, we're going to need to install PythonShell. But PythonShell is a npm package that basically allows you to run Python inside of Node.js. And now the important thing here is that the easiest way to do so is to actually create a Python file and then send that information, and run that file basically. First thing we want to do is convert whatever is being sent from the front end into a Python file, and then we want to send that Python file into the Python shell and run it. So let's do that real quick. We know that we are sending the request body, which is the code, to the backend, but what we want to do is turn this code into a actual Python file, right? So the actual Python, to do that, we're going to need to import the file system. So const fs equals require fs. So the file system, this is the file system. And let me just sort of clean this up because I don't like how it's unordered weirdly. So yeah, so we're going to import the file system, and what we want to do is create a new file. Hold on. So what we want to do is create a new file when we send anything to the Python backend. We can do fs.writeFileSync, and the file that we're going to create is just going to be test.py. This is going to be the file that we're going to write to. And what are we writing into this file? We're going to write the requests body.code. And so now when we have, when we send something to the backend, we should see a file open up inside of our server folder called test.py with the actual code that we sent. So let's just test that out and see that that is working. So I'm going to restart the server. Now I don't have NodeMon installed. Oh, something is going on here. I can't have Express before installation. Oh, right, I have to go like this. So I don't have NodeMon installed, so I'm gonna have to keep restarting the NPM server, but hopefully, it still makes sense. So right now, let's open this up, and we should see that when we press submit here, we should see a test.py file with this code inside of it. So let me submit it. And there you go. So test.py is working because we are writing to this file. And what we want to do is send this file to the Python shell and then ensure that the code is correct. But just remember that the code that I'm sending is actually not correct, right? This is not a function that adds two numbers. Now it is a little bit, now you could take this to the next level and actually code out the full implementation and take in the variables or anything like that, but I decided to create it more simply so that, you know, we can just sort of do a proof of concept for this project, right? So I'm going to pass in this code to the backend and ensure that it's working. So let me just confirm with you guys that this is the same code that is going to add two numbers. So this is the function called def add two numbers. And what we're doing here is we're creating the Python file itself so that we can run it inside of the Python shell on the back end. And what this is doing is it's taking in three separate arguments, right? So it's taking in the first argument as argument A, it's taking the second argument as argument B, and it's taking in the third argument as the result. So what we want to do is when we're running the project, we want to pass in a simple test. Like, for example, we want to pass, if we're running the code, right? Let me just do a sample right over here. What we want to do is say Python and pass in test.py and then pass in the argument 1, 2, and 3. What that's going to do is it's going to set this first argument to A, the second argument to B, and the third argument to 3, so that when we print it out, we're going to return true. And so that should, it should work. So if we do like 5, 2, and then like 7, this should be true. Now if we do 5, maybe like 4, 2, and 7, because add A and B are going to return 6 instead of 7, this is going to be returning false, and then we can handle that error in the back end and then send it back to the front end. Let me stop this server and let me install the Python shell. So npm install Python shell. And here in the Python shell, we can pass in some specific options. So it's really easy to pass in a couple arguments. So the mode is going to be text, the Python options, we're going to pass this in, and of course the arguments that we want to pass in as well. So let's see how to add this inside of our code. So what we can do is just sort of copy this as is, right? And what we want to do is we don't need this thing or this thing, because let me pass in argument 1, argument 2, argument 3, like so. And what we're doing here is going to run the Python script. Now the script that is getting created is called test.py. So we want to change this to test.py, and we're going to pass in these options right over here. And here all we're doing is printing the results, right? We're not actually sending anything back to the front end for now, but let's just print the results and see what results are happening. We should see that it's getting printed true because we're passing in the arguments 1, 2, 3. 1 is going to be A, 2 is going to be B, and 3 is going to be result. So because 1 plus 2 equals 3, we should see the result true on the back end. So let me npm start the backend code, and let me submit this to see what happens. Do I have to refresh this? Maybe I have to refresh it. Let me copy this code again. Oh, I didn't save it, I think. Yeah, I didn't save that code. Oops. Anyway, let me get the actual code. This is the correct solution. So I'm just copying that and let me submit it. Oh, what's happening is I forgot to import Python shell. Oh my goodness. So let me import const Python shell equals require Python shell dot Python shell. Let me restart the app, and now we should see it. as you can see, it shows the results and the results are true. So for example, say we pass in a plus b plus 10, right? This should in turn say that instead of being true, the result should be false. So let's see what happens. Cool, so we get the false result. So now all we got to do is pass this to the front end and display an error or success message. So now we've got the results that we want, and all we want to do is pass these in to the front end. And so we can do so by just calling it here, right? And here we can just pass the results. Now I'm just going to pass, so for the purpose of this tutorial, let's just, pass in one sample test case, because adding multiple test cases adds a little bit more complexity, but I actually did that inside of the GitHub repository. So if you want to see the full code, then just check out the GitHub repository for this project. But for the case of this demo, let's just send the results back to the front end, right? Instead of logging the results, I'm just going to send them to the front end. Pass or fail. And this is going to be result 0. So we know that results is an array, and it's basically returning like an array of true or false. Because we know that these are the only two options that it can be, we can just sort of pass that back to the front end. And once we have that in the front end, we want to display it, right? We want to update our UI. So let's just confirm that it is getting sent properly. I'm going to open up the console. And when I submit this, I should get false, right? Oh, I forgot to restart. So yeah, so we restarted the app and we can see that it is false. So now if we pass in the correct code, we should get true. Cool. So now all we want to do is display this in the front end, and that is actually pretty straightforward. So what we can do is create a variable. Actually, let's make this an array. So correct test cases, and let's call this set test cases, and let's just make this an array. And what we want to do is when we get this data, we want to we want to push this into the project, into test cases, so that we know whether or not it is correct. And let me show you how to do that. We can say set test cases and set it to be data dot pass or fail. So this is going to be data.pass or fail, and we also want to display this inside of our app. So for every test case, so let's say test cases dot map test case, let's pass in an integer as well, so that we can avoid that each div needs a specific key issue. And let's just display the test case for now. And see what we get here. So I'm going to refresh that, and let me find the correct code that actually solved the problem, because I don't want to keep doing that over and over. So yeah, we get true here. So that means that this code is correct. So if I press 10, it should be false. Now all that's really left to do is a little bit of UI changes. So for example, if the test case equal true, then we can say that this was it was a success. Otherwise, we can just say that the test case failed. And so as you can see here, this is the incorrect definition of add, because I mean, it's not right, so it's going to fail. And then if I were to correct it and then submit it, then you get success. So yeah, that's going to be it for today. Hopefully now you guys know how platforms like LeetCode or AlgoExpert or CoderPad, just how they work under the hood. And now you have an understanding of how to build one out for yourself. And if you guys enjoyed the video, then leave a like and definitely consider subscribing for more content just like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you guys next time.